everyone, and welcome to this episode of Gen Live, which we're calling Wrapping Up 2024. Gen's editors reflect on the past year and look ahead to 2025. I'm Julianna LeMieux, Deputy Editor-in-Chief at Gen, and I'll be your host today. As 2024 comes to a close, it's the perfect time to reflect on the science and industry news from the past year. And it's been a busy one here at Gen. And we even made some news this year ourselves as well. If you haven't heard, Marianne Liebert, Gen's parent company, has been acquired by Sage Publishing. So we are very excited and look forward to a future together with Sage. Also this past year, we have traveled to conferences all over the country, hosted 4 virtual summits, conducted countless interviews, and put together 12 issues of our print magazine. And countless stories online, I should add as well. In this episode of Gen Live, I'm joined by my colleagues, Uduak Thomas and Alex Philippidis, to discuss the stories that had the biggest impact, some of our favorite interviews from the year, and what we're looking forward to in 2025. And we'll have a Q&A session too, so please jump into the conversation whenever you want and ask us questions. So I hope that Alex and Uduak, we've all made our cups of hot cocoa or coffee or whatever, and we'll get started. So we'll take a moment. I'm going to ask us each to introduce ourselves. So Alex, can you just tell us briefly about what you do at Gen and what you specialize in?
Sure. The title is Senior Business Editor, and what that means is I specialize in biopharma business news and trends writing up. That includes our weekly Stock Watch roundup, where we look at stocks that either went way up or way down and try to figure out why. But it also means deep dives into companies with either very interesting technologies, very important clinical or commercial milestones, or a little bit of both. And I've been focused on that. I've been at Gen for 13 years. It'll be 14 years in February. And all that time as a biopharma business writer for Gen.
Awesome. Thanks, Alex. And Uduak, you wear many hats at Gen. Can you tell us a little bit about what you do?
I do. Thank you. So my title is Senior Editor at Gen, and I do a little bit of writing from a variety of angles, both academic, published papers, published research, but also a lot of writing on things going on in industry, trends, new companies, new technologies. So a lot of, and I don't know that I have a specific beat. I sort of write about different things that interest me. Some topics are, I think a little bit more interest to me personally and professionally. But I do have a pretty diverse list of topics that I write about. So that's one component of what I do. But the other component, which maybe there are folks in the audience who have seen my face do this a lot, is I handle our webinars, moderate our webinars on a wide range of topics. I'm happy to go into more of that later on, some of the things we've covered this year. And that I think is one of I love the writing, but I also really do enjoy talking to people and hearing about great science and the great work that they're doing, solutions that they're developing. I have learned more about topics that I could possibly imagined when I started at Gen. And I believe I joined in 2020, 2023. So I'm sort of the youngest in terms of my time at Gen on the team. I've only been here a year and a half, but it's been great. So that's a little bit about what I do. I also occasionally will write for a Gen magazine as well, and Gen Biotechnology, which is one of the journals that we have here at the Marianne Liebert part of Sage company.
That's right. Yes. We should say that's new news, so just getting used to saying that as well. I think wearing many hats at Gen is a commonality between all of us, probably. And I'm in the middle as far as age goes, I guess, at being at Gen. So I've been at Gen about 6 years, started as a science writer, and then 2 years ago moved into the Deputy Editor-in-Chief position. But we all are online doing, all 3 of us are online doing summit interviews, doing our shows like Gen Live, webinars, Alex's show, podcast, for example. So, and also, of course, just constantly working to bring the latest in biotech news, whether it's the business side, like Alex is doing, more of the science side that Uduak and I and others focus on to our audience. And we'd be remiss to say that this is not the entire Gen team. Of course, there's many other people on our team, all kind of working with passion to do that. So, okay, terrific. So now that we've gotten through our introductions, let's start with some of the science or some of the news of the year. So this is going to be a broad look, like we just introduced. We're going to talk about topics that we've covered both in the magazine and online and in some of our virtual events. So let's start with a big general look. I always like to take a 30,000 foot view. So Alex, let's start with you. What are some of the big takeaways for you from 2024?
I think the first one that strikes me is that the pace of biopharma business activity quickened this past year. And I base that more on in terms of seeing more announcements, more collaborations, more trials. I also noticed that certain technologies generated outsized amounts of news. You couldn't not hear about AI in 2024. Not only companies incorporating the technology into the way they discover and develop drug candidates, but also in terms of how they look at targets, what targets to go after, and what drugs to pursue against what targets. Also, spatial biology and the whole jockeying of companies for position that took up. There was a lot of company drama in the spatial field this past year, for sure. On the financial front, there were signs of life, for sure. I wouldn't say a full-blown bull market or big boom necessarily, but definitely on the right track in terms of stocks, in terms of venture capital financings, although smaller companies will still complain that the capital is a little hard for them to come by, which shows you that investors are a little bit selective in terms of what companies they go to, what technologies wow them and which don't for whatever reason. So I would say, just here's an anecdote. Conferences we had, and I know we'll get to conferences later, we saw more people attending these things than we have in past years as we emerged from the COVID-19 pandemic. And that's a sign to me of life getting back and business in biopharma getting back to normal.
Yeah. Okay, terrific. Yeah, that was a great introduction. I want to kind of take a deeper dive into almost everything that you just said. But Uduak, what about yourself? Like big takeaways from the year?
Yeah, I think everything Alex said, but also I think there's still a lot of excitement. I'm going to caveat this a little bit in a second around AI. I think a lot of conferences I went to, I think a few of them were sort of more tech focused, but there's still very much a lot of interest around AI. And it's very clear that everyone is trying to incorporate AI, or at least indicate that they're incorporating AI into the work that they're doing. I do think there is I do think the community, let me say it this way, is self-aware. Like it's clear that people understand that there is, at least from people I talk to, I mean, maybe in sort of private one-on-one conversations, it's clear, I think, that people understand that there are limitations to AI. It's not this tool that's coming in and going to just completely fix all the problems that we have. So I think there is a level of self-awareness, but there is still very much a lot of interest, I think, in AI and in applying AI to all kinds of problems. Whether that will be successful in every case, I think still remains to be seen. I think we're seeing some evidence that maybe it may not be successful in some areas, remains to be seen. I don't know. Or maybe the directions people want to go may not be the best directions or the best applications for AI. I think some of that will still shake out moving forward into 2025. The other thing I was going to point out, there's still a lot of activity in the editing space. I think there's a lot of interest, and again, I'm sure we can get into it later. There are challenges there too, but there is still a lot of interest in editing. A couple of articles I did this year focused on companies focused on epigenome editing, which was something that I hadn't really covered before. And I mean, it's new, so that's probably why I hadn't really covered it. So it was interesting to see the different approaches companies are taking, and trying to develop treatments for diseases, or to in one story that I covered, not specifically about epigenome editing, but editing more broadly, to improve agricultural animals and species. So I think those are two things that I would throw into the mix as sort of big topics for this year. And we also had a summit, AI and drug discovery, which I'm sure we can talk about later too, if folks didn't attend that, which was very interesting. Lots of really great talks, really great companies. So there's a lot going on, I would say.
Yeah, I want to pick up on the editing comment just for 1 second, and then maybe jump back to AI for a second with my thoughts. But I actually looked because I thought I was looking through some of my, this was a fun exercise to review the year and the stories that I've worked on, because, as we joke, we don't remember what we wrote, yesterday sometimes. So never mind, like in January of this year. But I thought I remembered an article I really enjoyed working on, which was RNA editing and that emerging space. And I thought I had written it this year. Turns out it was last year, 2023. But there's been some news in that case. Like, remember, Alex, do you remember covering that Wave Life had a candidate in the clinic recently? So that space, I think, is going to be like one to watch maybe in 2025.
I think so. In October, Wave said that their AATD candidate, WV006, succeeded in the first ever clinical demonstration of RNA editing in humans by achieving what they said was positive proof of mechanism in a phase 1b/2a trial. And that's a big step up for RNA editing.
Yeah.
And, I would argue it probably didn't get as much attention as it should have at the time. And I just think, I don't know why that is. Maybe it's because with CRISPR and that field advancing more slowly than I think had been expected, people want to wait and see with RNA. But it's a step forward for the editing field and the RNA editing field. And they recorded some good data as well. So that is for sure an example of how editing technologies are moving beyond CRISPR, the molecular scissors, so to speak. We know, and we've written about base editing and prime editing. Prime Medicine got its first candidate into the clinic in 2024, for example. And we've seen at least clinical progress emerging in 2024, and I would expect that will step up in 2025.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it doesn't get as much kind of news or space as it should, or as other areas. But anyway, we'll continue. I think that's definitely on my radar for 2025. Wait, going back to the AI for 1 second, and then maybe we can put AI to whatever we want. This is our hour to do whatever we want. But I feel like we started. What I want to say is I'm very curious what's going to happen in 2025, because I feel like the beginning of 2024, talking about AI, is very different from where we are right now. And I feel like it was really, in every conversation in the beginning of 20, and the end of 2023 even, it just about a year ago. But I feel like, we would get press releases just saying we're an AI company, we use AI, we were flooded. Yeah. And then you talk to companies and they'd say, no, we're really an AI company. We're not like the other companies. But I feel like that, at least for me, I'm curious about you, has settled down. That kind of huge, and we've seen this before. We've seen these waves before. And I wonder, I'm not saying AI, of course, is an amazing tool that will be used going forward forever and will make a huge improvements in what's happening. But I wonder what the hype will turn into in 2025. Do you guys have any predictions maybe on that? Or
I think it'll depend what the clinical
yeah,
results show, and those are going on. The leading companies in the field are well into trials with several candidates. We saw in silico medicine with some announcements. Actually, all through the year, we saw Recursion as well. Um, there, part of the hype of AI is the promise that it can both shorten the time of development for drugs, and we've seen the figures of anywhere from $1 billion to $2 billion, depending who's doing the estimating, as R&D costs to bring a new drug to market. AI is supposed to slash that, and it's supposed to also slash the cost as well as the time to market on that. We'll see. I think that's where the jury's still out in my mind. Although the key question is, what is it going to produce in the clinic? Now, so far results have been promising, but these have also been early, either phase 1 or phase 2 trials. Wait till we get into phase 3, and if there's anything, I guess I'll go on a limb. I expect to see somebody go ahead and announce something going into phase 3 to move things along, since that's part of the allure of AI. I don't know yet what company, so I guess I'm not quite, but I do see somebody, because there's just been so much talk. There's also, we talk about AI. Geez, you couldn't, I mean, there's so much news from NVIDIA, which isn't really a drug discovery company by any means, but their graphics processing units and other technology, they have clearly marked the life sciences industry as an industry that they think that can benefit from their technology, and created all these collaborations with companies like Recursion in AI. And that through the year, you saw their stock go so high that they wound up splitting the stock in the middle this year. And then most recently, and we had this as of today, the news was from a couple of weeks ago, where their venture arm is put in a little more investment in an AI drug discoverer called Genesis Therapeutics. That's a spin out from the Vijay Pandey lab at Stanford University.
Yeah, I agree with Alex there. I think the proof is going to be in the pudding, so to speak. We need to start seeing, hopefully in 2025, maybe 2026, who knows, start seeing some of these efforts bear fruit in the clinic, I think. And yeah, it's hard to say. And I mean, definitely in drug discovery, I think that's maybe where sort of the biggest push is right now, drug discovery and development. But there's other groups that are working on applying AI to looking closer at the genome, understanding the proteome, like things like that as well. So there's a lot of work. There's been a lot of money invested in AI at this point. So I hope to see some fruit start really coming out, some actual tangible, not just we're doing this great work or this interesting study, or we're developing this interesting model. I think I hope we will start to see a bit of a return on the investment that has been made so far in the coming year. Yes, I'll stop there.
Yeah, no, and we should mention at Gen, we really do look at AI through a lens of primarily drug discovery and tool development, which is enough. That's a lot. But also, I just wanted to mention that the perspectives of our colleagues, for example, at Inside Precision Medicine, our sister, publication. I mean, AI is playing a whole other role over there in reading, X-rays and things like that in the clinic. And
pathology data, yeah.
Yeah, the oncology. So that's like a whole other space that that they're writing about all the time. But yeah, just wanted to mention we're really pretty focused typically on drug discovery and basic science like protein folding, and also tool building. But Okay, do you think we can leave AI?
We'll revisit it next year.
You know what?
Hopefully
Okay,
then
so
we'll have.
this is what I'll say. Besides AI, just for this question, what are there any topics that you wrote about this year that were new to you that you hadn't written about before?
More on the spatial biology front. A couple of years ago, I did the first Gen A list on spatial biology companies and was flummoxed to see a reaction from many companies saying, "Hey, what about us? Hey, what about us?" It's you can see from that spatial biology is a little bit more of a competitive field than other subfields in biopharma. And in the spatial biology front, we saw a lot of drama. We saw in terms of nanostring technologies filing for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in February, a few months after a jury verdict came out in favor of 10x and had directed nanostring to pay like $31 million. So NanoString wound up finding a buyer, and that was Bruker. And the acquisition at bankruptcy auction helps Bruker grow its footprint in spatial, which it has talked about for a few years now. But now with NanoString, they really have a company that really shows their presence in the field, more of a higher profile. You had 10x Genomics, a leading company in the field, talking about more of getting its technologies out to folks. You had the issue because of their leadership, whether indeed their practice of challenging the patents of competing companies. There was a lot of controversy over that that played out in 2024. But also the technologies are expanding, and we're seeing in the private only owned side, two major players. You saw VizGen and Ultiview merge. And that shows you that even in an emerging area like spatial, there's consolidation and a sense by leading companies that they need to get bigger.
Yeah, and based on going on that spatial, I mean, we covered all of that so closely. I remember the news about NanoString going for bankruptcy breaking as I was packing my suitcase to fly to AGBT, which is just, a huge omics conference with tons of spatial and NGS and single cell. I mean, they're all there. And so, at that meeting, I was able to interview Joe Beecham, the, long spatial pioneer, and at that time, still currently CSO, then NanoString, who really originated that technology at that company. And then we followed it all the way up until just recently when we had an interview with, I want to say it's Mark Munch, who's the head of Bruker Nano Group, who is part of the group that, which is the part of Bruker that is now kind of taken on NanoString. So we've followed that spatial story the whole way through. Uduak, any new topics this year for you?
Yeah, I sort of alluded to one of the new ones for me this year earlier. I've historically sort of written more about biomedicine, applications of technologies to healthcare, human disease, and so on. For the first time this year, I did a little bit of writing about ag bio, which was very interesting to me. And again, this is specifically about gene editing. Earlier this year, I wrote about a paper. I believe it was published in one of our journals. I may be completely misremembering. I believe it was the CRISPR journal, which focused on CRISPRed pigs from a company called Genus. They're a UK-based company, and they had developed a generation of CRISPR-edited pigs that were resistant to I believe it's PRRS, porcine reproductive and respiratory syndrome, which is a very infectious disease that has been decimating animals of the porcine persuasion. So that was something that was really interesting to me. And I also covered a couple of other ag bio related content this year. I believe companies like Pairwise and Corteva, there was some relationships there, focused, I believe, more on plants and applying editing to plants. And then the other thing I'd shout out related to this particular topic is in one of our summits earlier this year, I actually got a chance to interview the CSO of Genus and also Dr. Allison Van Eneman, who are both really, really big in sort of the ag space, to talk about the state of livestock gene editing. That was a really interesting panel discussion that was part of one of our summits earlier this year. So that was something that was new to me, and turned out to actually be a really interesting dive into the topic for me. So I'd highlight that.
Yeah, I love that space. It's so exciting. I was very fortunate to be asked to go to AGBT Ag, which is like AGBT, but strictly agricultural. It's like ag genomics, and sit through those talks about people who are working. And they have both plants and also animals at that conference. Mm-hmm. And it's genome editing. It's also just using genomics to improve certain traits in animals or breeding, or a lot of people are thinking to the future about, when things are warmer, growing crops that can exist in drier climates or, so that's like such an exciting space. That's great. We definitely need to keep covering that in 2025.
Absolutely.
Also in omics for me, I remember leaving ASHG. So this would have been at the end of 2023, and there was so much proteomics there. I thought proteomics is just totally, exploding. And indeed it was, with these new technologies that are being released now. And so I went to HUPO, which is the proteomics meeting, and I was in Portland, Oregon, and also just explored some different emerging proteomics technologies that are coming out, and wrote about that this year. So that would be like, I think the article that for me was really, really new. Both protein, there's like protein sequence, like peptide sequencing, protein sequencing, but then also large panels, just more screening proteomics. But I think the move to multi-omics is real. It's totally happening. So, and that's a large part of it. So that was kind of cool. Well, maybe we should talk a little bit about meetings, because we all went to different places. Uduak, you and I got to go to places where they had band concerts.
Indeed. A very, very exciting band, very exciting concert. So, hopefully some folks will know, of course, we're talking about ASHG and PacBio's well-known surprise guests who pop up at their events. This year, we should say first, this year, the meeting was in Denver, Colorado, and which it was pretty well attended. I thought there was a lot going on. We did get a lot of snow, so maybe that.
We should say it was over during election week and in the middle of a snowstorm.
In the middle of a snowstorm. So it was two things happening for everyone. But it was still really interesting. It was still really a fun meeting. Lots of announcements, and the musical guest, if it's not known at this point, was One Republic. They had a phenomenal concert, so we definitely enjoyed that. But there was also a fair amount of news that came out from the meeting, and I know I'm actually going to throw it to you, Juliana, because you had something really, really interesting come out of that meeting as well.
Oh, yeah. ASHG, well, I like to cover omics a lot. And so ASHG is, one of the places to be for sure. I was really fortunate. Well, and, I sat down with Christian Henry actually before the meeting and asked him. So they launched Vega, which is their new, and there were, I think that was maybe was that the only instrument launch? I think that was definitely
I think I think the others were updates. Yeah.
Yeah. So they launched their benchtop sequencer. And so speaking to him about why they were releasing a benchtop now was really interesting. They launched the Revio a couple of years ago at ASHG. And he, the idea is just to get hi-fi sequencing, which is the PacBio sequencing, into more hands and to make it more accessible and to get it into more labs. And so that was kind of interesting. And they released that there with the concert and everything. The concert had a reason.
It did.
And another kind of interesting omics thing that happened, well, all the single cell companies were there, of course, spoke with several of them. Scale and Parse were both there, but also got a chance to sit down for the first time with Jacob Thaysen, who, if that name doesn't ring a bell, he took over at the helm of Illumina just about a year ago. So at an extremely tumultuous time for the company. And when he took over so this would have been like fall 2023, both Alex and I reached out, right, Alex? And we reached out to Illumina independently and said, hey, we want, is he ready to talk? And they said, no, he's, and we understood he was busy. He had a lot going on. But so he was ready to talk now a year later. And so we sat down at ASHG and it was really nice because, you get the press release of like his bio and what he's done, but you don't really get a sense of what really is your background? Where have you been? And also I was really curious to understand why he wanted to take this job at such a tumultuous time in a company that was being watched so carefully by so many people. So that was a really great interview. He was very forthcoming. He answered, he was really very calm, cool, and collected. And he's been at Illumina now for a year. I think he feels like some of the tumultuous time is far behind them, and just like totally looking forward to the future of what to me came across. You can read the whole article, but like a very customer-centric move, and getting back to like what sequencing customers want, and also moving into multi-omics was the other take-home message from there. Not necessarily on the instrument itself. The instrument is this DNA sequencing instrument, but they had launched this proteomics, kit to go with it. Of course, partnering with single cell companies. And also he talked a lot about it was like about the front end and the back end, almost like, data integration, data processing, handling these huge amounts of data that are coming out and which are not getting any smaller. They are only getting bigger, those data sets. So that was kind of what he's focusing on for the future. So in and among the election news and the snowstorm, we did talk a lot of omics at the time. Yeah. And then, so Alex, maybe you're heading out in a couple weeks to JP Morgan, right?
Yes, I am. Another, what's now become an annual trip to San Francisco for me in January to attend some of the presentations, but actually do a lot of interviews with CEOs and other notables in biopharma while I'm there. And it was this past year, they had, I reckon it was back up to about 8,000 people. It was held in San Francisco despite talk in 2023 that maybe it was going to leave the city by the bay because of quality of life concerns there, but that didn't happen. And instead, they stayed and they did the conference there in 2024 and will do so again next month. That can be a whirlwind. What I find is that while some of the presentations are of interest, a lot of times those things, the meat of those get announced into press releases anyway, and you're better off meeting one-on-one with people. Well, as one-on-one as you can get with all the PR folks and others there. But it was one thing I'll be looking to is a sense of some of the up and coming companies in areas of interest, whether they are in AI or in even drug development, where companies have shown progress, and that I wanted to catch up with some that I've written about in past years. JP Morgan lets you do that. Also, just a plug for a side conference event called Biotech Showcase, because there is they have an annual panel of reporters who cover biotech for various biotech focused outlets, and I'm part of that panel, along with reporters from Stat and Endpoints and the San Francisco Business Journal, whose reporter Ron Ludi has been covering this field for more than 2 decades. So it's a good mix of talent at that panel, and I'm looking forward to San Francisco. I hope the weather will cooperate. In past years, we've had the deluge, the
Yeah.
floods. Yeah, some years it's been very cold for San Francisco, so hopefully we'll have some good weather to hold this event in. But boy, what a in terms of conferences, that's one of the two big ones I go to, JP Morgan. The other is BIO, the annual
Oh, yeah.
Biotechnology Innovation Organization. This past year in June, BIO was held in San Diego. They had 20,559 people attend, which has to be at least a post-COVID record. I'm not
Yeah.
sure it's the all-time, but it was definitely more crowded, and it was definitely business getting back to usual after the last 4 or 5 years. That's, again, more of an economic development focused conference where a lot of cities and states, in addition to companies, want to present their areas as being optimal for biopharma businesses. And some actually succeeded. That started in 2007 when Massachusetts used bio in Boston to announce a $1 billion bond, the first of what are at least two, and we may see a third one eventually if lawmakers in Massachusetts can agree on the details. But it shows you that used to be more of a straight science conference if you go back to the 90s, and that's certainly changed to more business and, dare I say, economic development.
Yeah. And you're mentioning the panel that you're going to be in next month reminded me that Uduak was also in a similar panel at a conference here in New York City at the BioFutures meeting.
Yes.
Representing
Jen.
Yeah. And a lineup of reporters. So that is super cool.
Yeah.
And we're all, all of us are in panels and things like that on different stages. We can't talk about all the conferences, but maybe we should just mention that I think in 2025, we're going to be at SLAS. I'm going to try to go in order. Alex at JP Morgan, myself, I'll be at AGBT in February. And then we'll have different people at AACR, ASGCT. I'm definitely going to forget one. Oh my gosh.
BioIT. That's okay. BioIT is another one that I feel like we'll be going to this next year.
And I guess we'll and ASCB, I believe, next year as well. And maybe HUPO again as well, the proteomics conference I mentioned. So we're busy traveling again. And yeah, looking forward to, my next trip is to San Diego, which is, I'm very lucky to, that's in January for SLAS. So we'll be there the third week of January. Okay, I want to move a little bit, Uduak. I want to make sure that we talk about some of our the online, webinar work that you do. And I'm wondering with webinars, and I guess I could speak to Gen Live as well, if you're seeing any trends or if there were any ones that were like your particular favorites that stand out.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the really, as I think I mentioned this earlier, something that I really enjoy about doing the webinars is just the broad range of topics that we cover. Everything from research, discovery, and development, all the way up to manufacturing, and everything in between. So I think this year, similar to probably what's been going on in the last few years, a lot of webinars focused on various therapeutics, so strategies and solutions for developing and manufacturing mRNA therapeutics, antibody drug conjugates, bispecific antibodies, cell and gene therapies. We also do have sort of the webinars that focus a little bit more on omics, so spatial omics, as we were talking about earlier. There's a lot of interest in organoids, I think, and things like organs on chips as well. So there's definitely a lot. We do a lot of webinars that focus on those topics. In terms of what stood out to me, it was kind of interesting. The ones that sort of jumps out to me this year, and it seemed really resonated with our audiences as well, given the numbers. So the first one I'll highlight actually has to do with Alzheimer's, which is one of the areas that I'm particularly interested in. There's a lot going on in Alzheimer's right now, both in terms of research, in terms of development of drugs and potential therapeutics that can work for the condition. There's good work. There's also maybe not good things going on. There's a bit of house cleaning, I think, that's happening. We've seen some retractions of certain studies, but this particular webinar was interesting to me. It focused on using blood-based immunoassays to detect early markers of the disease, as well as to measure some of the markers that are associated with co-occurring diseases with that we might see in Alzheimer's patients. So things like vascular disease and then some other kinds of proteinopathies. And this was a really interesting webinar. It featured Dr. Sterling Johnson. Folks in the Alzheimer's space might know him. He's from the University of Wisconsin in the Department of Geriatrics and Gerontology. Switching away from Alzheimer's, another one that really sort of stood out to me actually focused on immunotherapies, cell therapies beyond CAR T therapies was the interesting one. This was actually a panel that we did with 3 speakers from 3 different perspectives. So one talked a lot about CAR NK based cell therapies. Another one focused on GNK therapies. And then we also had someone speaking to TIL therapies, tumor infiltrating lymphocyte based therapies. I think I'm saying that correctly. So that was a really interesting panel. I think there's definitely a lot of interest in CAR Ts, I think, and a lot of conversation around them. So it was interesting to learn about some of the other approaches that are being worked on for oncology, but also in other diseases as well. Autoimmune diseases, for example, is something that folks are interested in. And then this one is another one I really liked this year, which I wasn't expecting to like, but it actually turned out to be really interesting. Has to do with PCR. You wouldn't think PCR is a pretty established technology. But there's a lot going on there. So we did, this one was another panel discussion earlier this year that looked at, that compared digital PCR to quantitative real-time PCR. So it was, what are the differences between the two? Both of them obviously are used for quantifying and analyzing DNA, RNA, and so on. But there are differences. They differ in their approach and in the applications of these technologies. So it was really interesting to kind of talk to Dr. Jim Huggett. He's very well known in the PCR space. He was on the panel. And I learned a lot from that one. PCR isn't something I thought I needed to know more about, but apparently I did, because it really sort of stuck out to me this year. And then I'll flag one more just because it was another really great discussion with somebody who's very well known in the space. This one was focused on antibody drug conjugates. Okay. It was a conversation I had with Dr. Ravi Chari, who, if folks are in the ADC space, they'll know who that is. We talked, just kind of went over the history of ADCs, a little bit about sort of the work that's been done to understand and select the 3 components. So the actual antibody, the linker, and the payload. He's been in the space for many, many years. I don't want to give away his age, but he's been around for a few decades. He's been around for a while. So he knows a lot. We talked a little bit about the ones that have already been approved. I believe it's 12. There's some, I feel, depending on certain sources, but I think the official number is 12. Correct. Folks can correct me if I'm wrong. And talked a little bit about what we've learned from getting these treatments to the point of approval, and what the future might look like. So I sort of threw a lot at everyone, but those are sort of four. We do a lot of webinars every month. Those are four that I think really sort of stood out to me as particularly interesting this year.
Yeah, those are great. Actually, one thing I want to mention when you just said, correct me if I'm wrong, is that please, if anybody has any questions for us, please throw them into the attendee questions. But the thing you just beautifully highlighted, I mean, what I love about our webinar program is how many topics it covers in the span of a year or even a month, with the number of webinars that we have. And also, just like you said, I mean, anytime I jump into one to do it, it's like I definitely am learning something new. I mean, just no question,
Yeah, absolutely.
Whether it's about it, just whatever topic it's on, really. I'm interesting that you mentioned organoids, because I was thinking through my shows, my Gen Live shows. Now I only get 12, I only have 12 a year, so about one a month. But organoids was one of the ones. I think I do an organoid Gen Live show every year. And of course, it's not a research presentation, right? I have two people on, leaders in the field, and we just kind of talk about the field, the challenges, the advances, what they think is, going ahead and things like that. And we do talk about their research as well. But I had Jim Wells from Cincinnati on and Christine Murmury from Leiden University Medical Center, two leaders in the field. And it was great. I learned so much about organoids. And also, I think informs our, all of our content going forward, really. What we focus on ends up maybe changing a little bit. But so, yeah, that was great. So Alex, before we're almost reaching the top of the hour, and before we do, I wanted to ask you to dig into a little bit of the business side. You watch the numbers closely. So are there any trends that you saw in the market in 2024, or big IPOs that happened?
Yeah, I mean, the IPOs showed some signs of life, couple of big ones. I mean, one that was not the biggest one, but an interesting one to me was BioAge Labs. Their longevity and transitioning into obesity science. Back in September, they raised $170 million in an IPO. This was a company that had a collaboration with Eli Lilly, tirzepatide, their GLP-1, and studying the possible combination of BioAge's lead candidate and tirzepatide. A couple of weeks ago, there were some safety signals seen, and the phase 2 trial was halted. And then the stock went down, as investors typically sell when bad news like that happens. But it was an early example, because I remember back in January of 2024, I had interviewed Kristen Fortney, and I had asked at the time, gee, has there been any interest in going public? And at that point, she demurred, as typical for companies that aren't going public, to not want to usually announce it right on the spot. But they did. It's an example of how even smaller companies that had interesting technologies found a place in the stock market with investors. And we could have had more, because one of the companies I wrote about that was headed for an IPO but didn't was Aurum Therapeutics. And Aurum is a company we profiled in July. Their operation split between South Korea and Lexington, Massachusetts. They develop cell-specific targeted protein degraders, and they're looking at a better type of preconditioning for their. And Aurum stopped their IPO effort because they're based in South Korea, and the Korean market plunged in early December when the president of South Korea declared martial law. And so they got caught up in the crossfire, as did other businesses that are Korean based, so their stocks go way down. So it goes to show you that sometimes even a company that shows promise can be subject to external events. We saw that. As far as biotech stocks themselves, one thing that interested me was that the chief electronic transfer fund for biotechs, the IBB, if you look at their 1 year performance, the stock now is at $137 a share. A year ago, it was at 130. So yeah, it went up, and it went well up up and down in the course of 2024. At one point, reaching close to 150 a share, but instead falling back as investors still a little nervous about whether the industry as a whole is poised to take off again. And we're still wondering that as we head into 2025. So, yeah, things have been better in a year and a half, but still not quite back to a big, rosy, bullish kind of a market. And so that we've seen IPOs, we've seen venture financings have picked up little signs of life. JP Morgan and Dealforma came out in the third quarter. They tracked, while it was $6.6 billion in private financing raised, it was down a little bit from $6.9 billion a year earlier. But the overall financing, if you look year over year, is headed for a positive increase year over year. Right now, $20.8 billion for the first 3 quarters of 2024. So we'll see how that goes, but I'm expecting to see some signs of life. And yet, you'll have companies that are not in the AI, not in the big wow kind of tech field, saying they're still finding it a little tough to raise the capital they need for their purposes. So, I'd be wanting to see as we get into 25, is that going to change? So we'll see.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. Thanks, Alex. I want to spend our last couple of minutes. Everybody will get about 1 minute, kind of a lightning round, I guess. And actually, we have a great question from an audience member, which will bring us right into this kind of prediction space, which is the question is, what topics on your ed calendars for 2025 are most exciting you? Or, what are we excited to cover in 2025? Who wants to start?
I mean, I can say this. I don't know that I would say all of it actually is exciting me. I think I'm really, one thing I've learned from this field is it's hard to predict what's going to happen year over year. I mean, there's definitely, yes, there's indications, like likely some of the trends we've talked about will continue into 2025. Some of the movement we're seeing I mean, we've talked about AI, we've talked about gene editing, we've talked about all of that. I think we'll see a lot more of that moving forward. It's really hard to say. So I think I'm excited by all of it. I'm excited to see what new companies come out. We saw a lot of companies emerging from stealth, commercializing a wide range of technologies. Something I didn't talk about that I got to cover this year was some companies that are developing new mechanisms for delivering therapeutics to cells. I mean, LMPs are sort of the big ones, but there's other companies that are developing other methods, which I think are super interesting. So I'm curious to see what new research comes out of academic labs or companies what companies launch, what they're targeting, what they're interested in. As we've talked about, hopefully we'll start to see some of the fruits of the work that's been put in over the years start to come out. So I think that's what's exciting for me. It's sort of everything, the whole package. I don't know that I can say a specific thing is sort of more exciting than others.
In terms of exciting, I can think of at least 3 things, and I'm sure I'll think of 3 others when this ends. But the first one is AI and clinical results. Will we see some positive results and enough to go into late stages? And will we see more consolidation among companies in the field? We saw Recursion and Excientia combine in 2024. In the case of Excientia, their founder CEO was dismissed for inappropriate behavior to employees, and then they wound up merging with Recursion. Alzheimer's drug development always interests me because of such a low percentage of these uh, candidates that make it through clinical trials. Will it finally get over the hump? I'm waiting to see what 2025 brings in that, as well as the second Trump administration and the potential that has to disrupt the longstanding FDA and the NIH, and whether there will be real disruption or more tweaks, we'll see. But the promise is there for real changes in how Washington approaches biopharma in the coming year.
Exactly, Alex. Great point. And also, because one of my answers would typically to that question, what am I looking forward to? Since the COVID vaccine was developed and distributed, I would say mRNA vaccines. I mean, we have covered mRNA vaccines. They have so much promise and potential. But to your point, Alex, we'll have to watch carefully about what's happening in the administration to see, how that plays out. And my other lightning round answers, well, always omics. And I think what I've noticed in the last part of this year is like a real dedicated move into multi-omics. So really, I'm very excited to see that space and to see how all the omics come together to drive drug development and others. I would also add to that, and well, Uduak, you touched on it, I would say gene therapy, gene delivery. Our first summit of the year is in January, and it's the state of cell and gene therapy. And I've been working on planning that. So I've been really excited about it. And one of my favorite articles from this past year was specifically on gene therapy, the progress and the advances made in gene therapy for children with inherited hearing loss. That space is so hot right now. Really, following from the successes in the vision and the eye sector. So gene therapy is always, and then with ASGCT, which happens in the spring as well, that'll be a place where I think will be really exciting this year as well. So I think we've covered a lot of ground today. And I hope that you both, Alex and Uduak, have great holiday plans for next week and beyond. So I think with that, and we'll just look forward to seeing what happens in 2025. And if any of our predictions came through, that'll bring us to the end of this session of Gen Live. I want to again thank both of you for this terrific discussion. It was a lot of fun for me, and I'm really looking forward to next year and working together. Thanks to all of you for tuning in. And Gen Live will be back again next year with a terrific lineup of 12 Gen Live shows. Alex, I think you're back here on Gen Live January for a JPM Roundup.
Yes.
I'm not mistaken, so we'll see you back here next month.
All right.
And with that, I'm Julianna LeMieux. Happy holidays to everyone, and we'll see you next year.
Happy holidays. Merry Christmas.
Happy holidays.